If this week felt like a blur of half-finished tasks, endless notifications, and energy crashes, you're not alone. A large share of the workforce now spends at least part of the week working remotely, and with that shift has come more distractions and less separation between work and rest. If you're juggling classes, a side hustle, or remote work from an apartment that never feels quite set up, I get it. Today, I'll share 7 productivity hacks that actually work in 2025. Practical, not performative. One of these even helped me reclaim evenings that no longer felt like a to-do list. And it all starts with questioning one of the biggest myths we've been sold about productivity. The myth of perfect productivity setups. One of the biggest obstacles many of us face is the unspoken belief that productivity starts with having the perfect setup. You've seen how it's portrayed online: minimalist desks where everything lines up just right, soft lighting, maybe a candle flickering in the background, and a polished laptop beside a neat color-coded dashboard. The message is subtle but clear. If your workspace looks like this, you'll suddenly become efficient, calm, and unstoppable. But if you've ever bought the new chair, the new desk lamp, or maybe spent a weekend reorganizing your room only to feel just as unfocused the next day, you already know the reality. Those adjustments don't guarantee progress. They make things prettier, sometimes more comfortable, but they don't remove the harder challenge: beginning messy work in less than ideal conditions. Social platforms have intensified this belief. The scroll brings endless, study aesthetic clips, complete with pastel highlighted notes and perfectly balanced coffee mugs. It's especially tempting for students, many of whom end up focusing more on how their notebooks look in an Instagram post than on whether the material makes sense. Workspaces, notebooks, and routines have become content, and content has little to do with actual results. It's productivity packaged as a lifestyle image, not productivity as lived reality. And the trap is easy to fall into because we instinctively want our work to feel ordered and calm, not messy and frustrating. This is where the idea of productivity theater comes in. Productivity theater is about looking busy or organized, but producing very little that matters. It can be endlessly tinkering with your to-do list app instead of finishing the task you typed into it. It might be spending an hour carefully designing a new planner spread while your assignment sits untouched. Or it could be staging yet another photo of your workspace, telling yourself you're about to focus, while the real work still waits. Whole offices sometimes become experts at this stage play, everyone's schedule bursting with meetings, inboxes flooding with replies, but actual projects moving at a crawl. And here's the kicker. The average person now spends around 2 hours and 26 minutes per day on social media. That's enough time to write pages of an essay, exercise, or finish off a big assignment. Yet so much of it vanishes into watching other people perform productivity instead of doing it ourselves. The truth is that genuine productivity looks ordinary and sometimes uncomfortable. It's answering 3 key emails while you're sprawled on the couch with yesterday's dishes still sitting on the coffee table. It's opening your laptop at a cluttered kitchen counter and typing a page, even though the background noise won't stop. It rarely looks cinematic or polished. Our brains often protest. Wait until it's quiet. Wait until the desk is clean. Wait until there's a perfect 2-hour block. But that mythical moment hardly ever appears, and the longer we hold out for it, the more progress slips away. I once had a friend who dreamed of writing a novel, but insisted they couldn't start until they had the right office. They wanted cozy lighting, an inspiring space, maybe even eventually a cabin. Years went by, and the setup remained unfinished. Another friend tapped out whole stories on their phone during crowded subway commutes. One had the vision of perfection, the other had imperfect action. The second one now has a published collection of stories, while the first still hasn't begun. The difference wasn't talent. It was refusing to wait for every condition to align before doing the hard, messy work. And once you take that first small step, even in clumsy conditions, momentum builds. A rough draft makes editing fun instead of intimidating. A single page of notes makes studying tomorrow less overwhelming. Once progress exists, tidying your space or lighting that candle feels like an optional bonus, something to enjoy after real work has already begun. The satisfaction doesn't come from the setup. It comes from actually advancing, and the nicer environment just amplifies what's already underway. It helps to separate vibes from outcomes. The vibe is the curated desk photo or the pastel study notes. The outcome is the finished essay, the coded feature finally working, the report ready for a meeting. No one remembers whether you lit a candle while you typed. What stands out is whether the work was done, whether you showed up in moments that were imperfect yet productive. And that's often easier said than done, especially when your room feels chaotic or your budget doesn't stretch to matching accessories. But here's the good news. None of that disqualifies you. Many of the most reliable and inventive people carry on in cluttered, noisy conditions. Their edge isn't that they control the mess, it's that they stop waiting for its absence before making a next move. This is especially useful to remember if you sometimes feel guilty comparing your space with those polished feeds. If the reality for you is notes scribbled on a cramped desk or typing on a phone during a bus ride, don't dismiss that as not real work. That's exactly how creative progress has always been made. Generations before us built things in basements, cafes, and noisy apartments. They didn't wait for stillness. They grabbed what they could, when they could, and the compound effect of that built into something meaningful. So the practical takeaway is this. Progress doesn't require spotless setups, it requires imperfect consistency. If you catch yourself about to rearrange your workspace for the third time today, pause and ask, what's one small thing I can finish now? Often, it's better to crank out 10 disorderly minutes of effort than spend an hour restoring vibes. Each scrappy move adds momentum. That habit gradually produces more than months of waiting for ideal environments. And this reframes what productivity should even feel like. Instead of measuring it by how curated your environment looks, measure it by whether something concrete moved forward. Did a draft appear where there wasn't one yesterday? Did an assignment shift one step closer to submission? Did an idea make it onto paper instead of floating in your head? Those things create deep satisfaction, the kind social media frames with aesthetic setups but can't actually manufacture. Knowing this, the question becomes, if real productivity thrives in messy, unpredictable conditions, how do you make the most of those conditions? Because not all chaos is equal. Some moments slip away quickly, others can be reclaimed if you recognize them in time. And once you notice them, even the smallest scraps of a day can be turned into progress instead of lost minutes. That's the shift we'll take on next. The parking lot practice. One overlooked way to reclaim lost minutes is what I call the parking lot practice. The name comes straight from a story about writer and teacher Matthew Dix. Years ago, he showed up early for a dentist appointment, and while most people would have pulled out their phone to kill time in the car, he opened his laptop and began writing. That habit stuck. Over the years, he drafted large parts of his books from parking lots, waiting rooms, and other in-between places where most of us assume nothing useful can happen. Those scraps of time added up, word by word, until they became full manuscripts. That's the core of the practice, using odd, inconvenient moments to take a small step forward, even if the situation feels far from ideal. The parking lot practice works because it lowers expectations. You're not being asked to finish a polished draft while sitting in your car with the engine cooling down. Instead, you use the situation to capture one piece of progress. It might be 2 sentences of an essay or the rough sketch of an idea you'll polish later. The action is small, deliberately achievable, and you only need to redirect the moment you'd normally spend scrolling into a creative deposit. Modest contributions don't look like much while you're doing them, but they form the foundation of steady progress. Consider a simple case. You're at the doctor's office, half an hour behind schedule, with a dozen people waiting just as impatiently. The default choice is obvious. You reach for your feed, swipe through videos, wait out the time. But apply the parking lot practice in the same 10 minutes and you might draft 3 bullet points for a project proposal, type a working title for an article, or jot a question that could unlock your assignment. Nothing ambitious, just one small piece you can carry forward. Suddenly, you're not wasting time, you're gathering building blocks. The moment feels the same from the outside, but the inside looks different. This isn't a new idea. Writers have been doing versions of this for centuries. There are journals scratched out on trains, fragments scribbled in hospital wards, even poems and letters drafted from battle trenches. These weren't serene conditions with curated workspaces. And yet, those fragments endure because the people who wrote them didn't wait for silence, order, or the mythical perfect block of time. That history makes something clear. You don't need a flawless setup to create. You need only attention in the small stretches already available. So if others could write lines that survived through chaos, We can certainly draft a headline while parked outside the grocery store. At first, it will feel awkward. Yes, working in a car or whispering into your phone's recorder while you stand in line might seem unusual. But many successful creators and writers point back to exactly these kinds of snatched intervals as the hidden spaces where their first drafts emerged. Think of it as private progress. No one around will know what you're doing, but later they'll see the product of those small efforts. And it stops you from relying on perfect conditions that rarely show up on their own. Modern distractions, of course, fight against this habit everywhere. When you feel a gap in your day, your device offers you dozens of ways to fill it instantly. That's why waiting feels shorter now. Our idle minutes are quickly absorbed into endless streams of quick hits and micro-entertainment. The time isn't actually gone, but your attention is. The parking lot practice flips that around. It asks you to treat downtime as a signal, not a void. The moment you sense that default urge to open a feed, you replace it with a tiny output. The best way to pull that off is to carry a simple capture tool. You don't need a leather notebook, though if that works for you, use it. Nearly everyone already carries the simplest version, the Notes app on your phone. For those who think better on paper, a pocket-sized pad works just as well. The point is readiness. When the pause hits, you can react instantly, recording something useful before distraction reclaims the time. And don't overcomplicate it. This is not a demand for fully formed ideas. A voice memo, a 2-line brainstorm, a sketchy outline are enough. The standard is not elegance but capture. Technology today actually makes this practice easier than ever. Voice-to-text tools allow you to record while walking, waiting, or sitting in traffic, safely parked, of course. You can dictate a phrase or even a half-formed idea, and by the time you're back at your desk, it's waiting in text form. Some AI-powered apps even organize and summarize those notes, turning loose fragments into usable material later. You don't need to maintain order in the moment. You only need to grab the thought before it fades. If you add up these tiny inputs, they become more visible. Suppose you commit to 5 minutes a day of parking lot practice. That translates into 35 minutes each week. Over a month, you've gained more than 2 extra hours of progress without scheduling another appointment with your calendar. That's 2 hours of raw ideas, partial drafts, or brainstorm material that didn't exist before. Compare that to the same hours spent passively consuming whatever an algorithm offered you. And the difference in long-term outcomes is enormous. One strength of this method is how little pressure it applies. Carving out a large focus block demands energy, quiet, and trust that nothing will interrupt you. But no one expects their finest work from a bus seat or a checkout line. Paradoxically, that's what makes it easier to act. Because the stakes feel low, you actually create more. The real value comes after. You open your notes later and realize you've already done half the groundwork. Messy beginnings are still beginnings, and you're further ahead than if you'd waited for ideal timing. That sense of relief, that you don't have to waste time simply because a setting isn't perfect, is what makes the parking lot practice so sustainable. It frees you from the idea that productivity must be tied to certain conditions. You remember that creative momentum often surfaces in quick, clumsy spurts. Those spurts may not look cinematic, but they generate compound progress. They prove that even caught-off-guard minutes hold value if you decide they do. If you want to test this habit today, here's an easy move. The next time you're stuck in a short wait, open your Notes app and write 2 sentences. It could be a headline, a title idea, or one small action related to a project. That's it. 2 lines instead of 2 swipes. Repeat it often enough, and you'll train yourself to spot these chances instead of letting them drain away unnoticed. So here's a challenge. Try the parking lot practice once this week, save what you capture, and check back in 2 weeks. Look at how that note has aged. Did it spark a larger draft, an insight, or at least reduce friction when you return to the project? You might be surprised at how much groundwork can appear from intervals you barely noticed before. And once you've proven that small moments can carry hidden progress, it becomes impossible not to see how much more time we let slip through unnoticed, waiting for us to reclaim it. The 10-minute window effect. Sometimes the most useful opportunities hide in plain sight, and that's exactly what the 10-minute window effect is about. These are the small scraps of time we usually underestimate. The few minutes before a meeting begins, the lull when food is on its way, or that pause between finishing one task and starting the next. Most people think 10 minutes isn't enough to matter, and so they default to scrolling, aimless refreshing, or distractions that leave nothing behind. But those micro windows stack up. A handful each day becomes hours in a week. You don't need an uninterrupted block of time to get somewhere. Minutes can accumulate into progress far more reliably than waiting for everything to line up. A simple mindset shift unlocks this. If you were handed a $10 bill, you wouldn't dismiss it as worthless. You'd take it, because 10 becomes 20, then 100. Time works the same way, yet we toss it away because it doesn't feel big enough. Reframing 10 minutes as valuable instead of trivial changes what we do with it. Commit to treating that time as an investment, and suddenly there's space for real progress in places you barely notice. Picture walking into a meeting room a little early. Most of the people around you lean on their phones, scrolling through updates they won't remember 5 minutes later. Meanwhile, someone else opens a notes app, jots a few bullet points for an idea, or refines the outline of a project. 10 minutes later, the meeting begins, and they walk in with something tangible while everyone else leaves with digital static. Across weeks, months, years, this habit of claiming small windows turns into a visible gap in output. The science supports the effectiveness of these short bursts. Research shows that focused attention, even in sessions as small as 10-15 minutes, builds into measurable improvement. It's the same logic behind micro-workouts. A few push-ups, 2 minutes of stretching, none seem worth much in isolation, but added together across a month, they make a real difference. Creative work and professional output function the same way. Attention applied in small pockets is still attention, and when repeated, it compounds. Matthew Dix illustrates this perfectly in his writing practice. He points out that even a 7-minute window was enough for him to write a few sentences in his car. That didn't finish a book in a day, but string enough of those micro wins together, and the book appears. To turn this into an actual habit, it helps to swap the default script. Instead of telling yourself, 10 minutes isn't enough, try asking, what can I finish in 10 minutes? That single sentence changes your orientation toward time. It prompts you to scan for fit-sized opportunities rather than dismiss them outright. And many tasks we avoid don't take as long as we assume. You can draft the rough structure of an email, brainstorm 3 bullet points for a proposal, edit 1 messy paragraph, or even clear a small admin chore. Let's ground it in something practical. Here's a template you can keep in mind. If I have 10 minutes, I draft 1 headline, outline 3 bullet points, or edit 1 paragraph. That's all it takes. Each option is small but specific enough to act on. You won't get lost wondering what to do. The rule gives you instant direction. And often, the hardest part of working is simply getting started. Once something is down on paper, the next session feels lighter because the dreaded blank page is already gone. Humor also makes the point clearer. Waiting for a Zoom call to begin? That's not just scrolling time. That's 3 sentences you could add to a report or a half-finished email that finally moves closer to done. Sure, the call might interrupt before you're finished, but next time you return to the task, you're picking up midstream. That's a very different feeling than starting from scratch. Those small fragments ease the load of larger projects by shifting the starting line forward. Contrast the outcomes across a week. One person lets 6 10-minute openings dissolve into phone time, feeling perpetually behind and convinced they never have space to catch up. Another person uses those same 6 windows to outline content ideas, draft replies, and trim clutter from their notes. At the end of the week, the second person is tangibly ahead, all from time the first person considered disposable. It's not the schedule that separates them. It's the value each placed on the small windows hidden inside the day. Of course, there's friction. Our attention spans have been rewired by constant alerts and endless feeds. 10 minutes can feel too short to focus, too easy to abandon for convenience. The problem isn't that 10 minutes lacks power, it's that distraction feels effortless, while intentional focus requires a micro-decision to resist. That's why having a pre-selected list of quick-win tasks makes the process smoother. It removes the thinking barrier. When the window arrives, you already know what to grab. Think about it as matching task to context. If you've got 10 minutes, don't open the deepest, most complex project. Instead, pick actions designed for quick handling. Clean up yesterday's messy notes, revise a single paragraph, set reminders for small events, brainstorm 3 titles for a video, or capture 2 questions you want answered in tomorrow's meeting. Each is finite, bite-sized, and leaves you with something accomplished in the short stretch. Without that framing, you risk defaulting to scroll mode because the brain doesn't want to improvise under time pressure. Momentum then starts to build. Once you've trained yourself to produce in small bursts, your definition of enough time shifts. The person who proves they can write 3 useful sentences in a hallway won't rely on an uninterrupted block of 2 hours anymore. They know progress can happen outside ideal conditions. That makes procrastination weaker because the old excuse, "I don't have enough time," no longer holds up. Here's a simple way to make the habit stick. Set an actual timer. When you've got 10 minutes to spare, open a notes app or document, start a stopwatch, and give yourself the full span with one focused micro task. The timer creates a boundary. It also makes the session feel like a game, which increases the likelihood that you'll try it instead of slipping into autopilot. Even a 5-minute timer can serve as a visual nudge that turns nothing time into progress. Do the math, 10 minutes equals 600 seconds. Stack 30 such windows across a month, and you recover 5 solid hours you never scheduled. It's unlikely you'll suddenly clear 5 hours straight from your calendar, but you can reclaim these smaller stretches. That shift doesn't demand extra planning. It only requires that you stop abandoning the in-between minutes. Over time, those reclaimed pockets stop feeling incidental. They start to form a reliable foundation underneath your bigger goals. And that raises the next challenge. While capturing small wins inside 10-minute windows proves incredibly effective, some projects are simply too large or too intimidating to shrink into slices. Every person has one, the manuscript still in their head, the business idea waiting for courage, the thesis that never moves past the outline. These goals don't stall because we lack scraps of time. They stall because their scale feels overwhelming, and trying to attack them from the start often kills momentum before it begins. This is where the strategy must adapt. Nonlinear progress with the lily pad method. Why do so many large goals stall out before they ever really begin? Most of us have something sitting in the background of our minds, a book we'd like to write, an idea for a small business, a thesis project, or a personal creative goal. The reason these projects often fade isn't laziness, it's the way we imagine progress. We tend to picture a straight line. Start at step 1 and move in sequence step by step until the end. When reality doesn't match that picture, the project begins to feel impossible before it even leaves the ground. The assumption that progress must be linear ends up stopping us long before the work itself. School reinforced this mindset early. Assignments are structured in a predictable march. Introduction, body, conclusion, 1 unit at a time. That makes sense in a classroom context, but real projects rarely fit that mold. Human energy doesn't flow in neat order, it rises and dips, sometimes hourly. Certain parts of a project feel heavy, while others seem exciting. Expecting our output to always align with a fixed outline sets us up for stalls. One difficult section creates friction, and instead of skipping ahead, we hesitate. We wait until we feel ready. But readiness doesn't come in the right order very often, which is why so many goals burn out halfway through. The lily pad method offers a different model. The idea, popularized by storyteller and writer Matthew Dix, is simple. Stop marching in a straight line and picture your project as a pond. Each task is a lily pad floating on the surface. None of the pads demand to be first or last. You can land on whichever one seems reachable with the energy you have at the time. Maybe today you're drawn to drafting the conclusion. Tomorrow, it might be revising a single section in the middle. Over time, pieces connect until a full structure emerges. Skipping between pads doesn't mean disorganization. It means progress stays alive. Imagine you're writing a thesis. The conventional script says you must start by tackling the introduction, even if that's the least inspiring section. That blank page grows heavier every time you open the document, and waiting for the right spark only lengthens the stall. With the lily pad method, you allow yourself to work where your curiosity currently points. Maybe it's the discussion chapter, or a segment of the literature review you feel clear about today. Write 3 pages there. Later, the introduction is easier, because much of the scaffolding is already in place. You didn't force your way through a locked door, you walked in through the entrance that was open to you. This shift isn't about cutting corners. It's about aligning your effort with your natural interest in the moment. For readers of this script, imagine you're writing a memoir or creating a study guide. The rules whisper that you must begin at Chapter 1, Page 1. But if Chapter 7 is burning in your mind, write that. If one case example feels vivid, capture it. Later, you connect it to earlier sections. There's no penalty for starting in the middle, except the one you create by assuming you're not allowed. The trap is that much productivity advice pushes the opposite. Most project management tools present sequential checklists. Academic and business guides define rigid stages. Research first, draft second, revise third. That order looks clean on a chart, but ignores how brains actually operate. Focus fluctuates, moods shift, and external conditions rarely support perfect sequence. When productivity advice ignores that fact, people feel as though they're failing simply because their energy won't cooperate with the official order. In practice, it's the system that broke down, not the person. The logic of the lily pad method is straightforward. Match the work to the energy you have. On a high-energy morning, land on a complex pad, designing a new feature, drafting a dense chapter, or solving a tricky analysis. On a lower-energy afternoon, hop to a lighter pad, formatting, trimming, organizing, or refining. Both moves count as progress. Both prevent you from staying frozen because step 1 didn't line up with your mood. Like a frog crossing a pond, you just focus on the next reachable pad, not the perfect sequence. To make this more tangible, think about how other creators apply it. Many YouTubers record parts of a script out of order. They'll film the core section first, saving the intro for later once the direction is clear. Novelists often draft the scenes they're most excited about before circling back to connective chapters. Songwriters sometimes lock down a chorus and then figure out the verses around it. In every case, the key is momentum. By bouncing to the pad that feels accessible, creators avoid burning energy on the part that feels like drudgery, and yet the overall work still comes together. Here's a bit of levity. Imagine if cooking shows forced chefs to chop vegetables in a specific order, refusing to let them move on until the onion slices were perfectly uniform. Viewers would starve before tasting the dish. That's what strict linearity looks like, being so stuck on the right first move that nothing else develops. The lily pad method says, the stew gets made even if the onions are uneven. What matters is that the cooking continues. The practical benefit is obvious. Nonlinear progress reduces the psychological weight of a big project. Viewed as a staircase, the work seems monumental. Viewed as scattered pads, each jump feels manageable. And because you keep moving, the larger shape eventually clicks into place. Progress matters more than sequence. When applied consistently, the effect compounds. A stalled project is like a pond where you demand to step only on pad number 1, but it happens to be slippery. You hesitate, you wait, maybe you circle back later. With lily pads, you keep moving whatever the conditions, and you always end up further across the pond than if you'd refused to start. That approach reframes productivity around adaptability, not rigid consistency. For you, the simplest experiment is this. Look at your current project and list 3 lily pads that don't need to be done in order. Then pick one and work on it for 10 minutes today. Sketch a later chapter, tidy one section of notes, or write the conclusion before any middle chapters exist. By proving that value can be created out of order, you weaken the false belief that projects must begin where they appear to begin. The sequence is flexible, the progress is real. That flexibility circles back to a larger principle. Managing projects isn't only about deadlines or checklists. It's also about managing yourself, where your attention goes, how your motivation runs, which tasks feel approachable in a given moment. The lily pad method acknowledges that energy powers productivity as much as time does. And it raises the question of whether we're accounting for the fuel that drives our work at all. Because when schedules don't match the energy available to us, even the most adaptive system can stall. Energy is the missing metric. Most productivity frameworks promise that if you just manage your hours better, everything else will fall into place. That's why so many of us invest in planners, time-blocking apps, and color-coded calendars. For a while, it feels like control has finally arrived. But the truth is that no matter how perfect the schedule, we don't run on hours, we run on energy. When that runs out, even the best plan falls flat. Time may set the structure, but energy determines whether that structure can hold anything inside it. That's why energy is the missing metric almost every system overlooks. The reality of modern work proves this point daily. burnout and fatigue now derail more progress than any shortage of hours ever has. Surveys continue to show that professionals aren't lacking in calendar space, they're lacking in capacity. You can reorganize your agenda, reduce meetings, or try to eliminate distractions. But if you attempt deep, creative work in the hour when your energy is at its lowest, the results will always disappoint. That mismatch drains both motivation and confidence, leaving people to blame themselves when the real problem is misaligned fuel. You probably recognize versions of this in your own day. Mornings often feel sharp, your thoughts move faster, decisions feel easier, and you can actually produce something worth keeping. Then after lunch comes the inevitable slump, when focus slips and even drafting a paragraph takes twice the effort. Forcing yourself to do heavy, high-stakes work in that dip is like trying to sprint with sandbags tied to your legs. The task itself isn't impossible. The energy simply isn't there. Using those valleys for lighter duties, clearing an inbox, filling out a form, feels manageable because the energy cost matches the demand. Yet the common mistake is assuming every task requires the same level of mental fuel, which only deepens frustration. The rise of time blocking illustrates the trap. On paper, allocating each task to a neat slot looks flawless. Mornings for deep work, afternoons for meetings, evenings for planning. But human rhythms don't bend to those blocks. Stress, sleep, diet, and countless interruptions constantly shift our capacity. This is why so many beautifully designed schedules collapse by mid-afternoon. The issue isn't discipline, the issue is biology. As writers like Tony Schwartz and Jim Loher noted, managing energy, not just time, is the real key to sustainable productivity. Our bodies follow ultradian rhythms, cycles of about 90 to 120 minutes where energy peaks and dips. Plan demanding work during your peak 90-120 minute cycles, and you'll find progress flows more easily than forcing it at random times. Adopting energy management means mapping your personal rhythm instead of pretending you're interchangeable with a clock. Watch for when you naturally feel alert, when boredom strikes, and when fatigue sets in. Instead of treating each hour identically, you match work to energy. Your most creative or strategic jobs go in the high-energy windows. Admin and shallow tasks get mid-level energy. Small maintenance, clean-up, or routine communication fills the valleys. The difference is stark. You're no longer trying to be at maximum power all day. You're moving with the cycle, not against it. For example, suppose you know mornings are your best slot. That's when you draft essays, code features, or tackle any job that demands sharp concentration. Then, as energy predictably dips after lunch, you pivot to easier wins, quick responses, filing documents, adjusting schedules. Later, when attention begins to recover in the early evening, you pick up light planning or brainstorming. Nothing gets wasted. Even your lowest hours aren't written off, they're simply given the types of work that match them. Instead of feeling like a collapse, each stretch becomes useful in its own category. Without this mindset, people keep punishing themselves. They sit down at 3 p.m. after a string of meetings, drained and hungry, and expect brilliance on command. Unsurprisingly, little gets done. Yet instead of recognizing the limits of timing, many shift blame inward. I lost discipline, or I lacked focus. But ask yourself, if your phone is at 1% battery, would you expect it to stream video flawlessly? Energy runs productivity the same way. It's not a moral failure. It's simple physics. Reframing carries a huge payoff. Productivity stops being about squeezing every minute and starts being about alignment. The key question becomes, not how hard can I push, but what type of work fits my energy right now? That subtle switch removes layers of guilt. And the outcome often surprises people. They get more done in less time because effort no longer leaks away into mismatched tasks. Motivation improves because the work finally feels lighter, even though total hours haven't changed. If you're juggling classes, unpredictable shifts, or side gigs, this shift matters even more. Trying to force in just one more hour at midnight when your spent doesn't produce quality. Mapping your energy can. Give your sharpest windows to what matters deeply, and let lighter tasks fill the rest. That's how momentum actually builds without sacrificing sanity. A small exercise helps bring this to life. Track your focus for 3 days and mark your strongest hour in each. You'll quickly spot your peak zone. Once you know it, protect that hour for deep work at all costs. Guard it from meetings, phone calls, or chores. That simple experiment often feels more powerful than any elaborate calendar hack because it reveals the rhythm you already live inside but rarely notice. Humor also makes the point sink in. No one eats a heavy lunch, scrolls through 2 back-to-back virtual meetings, and then casually produces their great novel before dinner. That's expectation running directly against energy. The slump belongs to easier, mechanical actions. Attaching guilt to that truth just multiplies frustration. By contrast, when you accept the slump and redirect it to lighter activity, the grind softens. It stops looking like lost hours and starts looking like intelligent division of labor. This approach also strips away a hidden burden, the need to maintain constant high output. Productivity theater glamorizes nonstop intensity, but sustainable systems acknowledge fluctuation as normal. Your role is not to flatten energy into a perfectly steady line, but to ride the natural rise and fall. Some stretches will always be less productive than others. The trick is making sure they still serve a role. From here, the next question almost asks itself. Once you learn to map and match energy, how do you restore it? Even the best energy map won't help if your supply runs dry. Energy isn't a permanent bank balance. It needs to be rebuilt through deliberate recovery. Yet culturally, we've treated recovery as weakness or inefficiency. That belief is why so many people ignore breaks, ignore sleep, and ignore pauses, even while their output declines. We rarely see rest as a real productivity tool. So the next step isn't about shaving your schedule tighter. It's about understanding what actually replenishes energy and why downtime can produce as much value as the hours you spend visibly working. That's where the focus goes next. Rest as a productivity multiplier. Rest is often seen as a pause button on progress, but in reality, it acts more like a multiplier. Many people still hold the belief that stepping away from work is wasted time, as if productivity only counts when you're actively typing, talking, or checking boxes. That assumption has been reinforced by decades of work culture, and it's even stronger now as remote work erases the line between job and home. When your laptop is always within reach, taking a walk or even sitting still can feel like neglect. But the evidence tells another story. Research, including findings from the University of Illinois, shows that short, intentional breaks improve sustained attention and make room for better creativity. Rest isn't a detour from productivity, it's a driver of it. Part of the problem is that rest gets confused with procrastination. Closing your eyes for a few minutes, shutting down your phone for an evening, or taking a guilt-free afternoon walk often feels suspiciously close to laziness. Because we've put recovery so low on the priority list, we tend to only allow it when burnout has already arrived, when the body finally forces a collapse. This creates a paradox. By resisting rest, work slows down and becomes less effective, which convinces people they should skip breaks even more. The results are obvious in those late-night marathons where concentration has evaporated, and yet we stay tethered to the screen, producing nothing meaningful. The alternative is reframing rest as active recovery. Rest, when chosen deliberately, doesn't sap your momentum. It restores it. Athletes understand this well. Training every single day without respite doesn't lead to continuous growth, it causes breakdowns. Progress comes from alternating stress and recovery so muscles rebuild stronger. The brain works in a similar cycle. Attention drains with use, and without recovery, each task begins to feel heavier. Rest swaps that decline for renewal. A short nap, a walk, even a quiet pause can reset your mental resources in ways sheer determination can't. Think of the brain like a battery. Nobody celebrates running their phone all day at 3% charge. Yet people still boast about pulling non-stop stretches of work as if perseverance can override biology. The truth is less romantic. Without recharging, performance simply crashes. Studies repeatedly demonstrate that strategic breaks can increase accuracy, creativity, and sustained focus. 2 minutes of silence or 10 minutes outdoors often lead to output that's sharper than hours of fatigued effort. Far from being indulgence, rest is resource management. But not all rest is equal. It helps to distinguish between collapse rest and intentional rest. Collapse rest is what happens when exhaustion wins. You zone out in front of the TV for hours, doom scroll, or nap for half the day because there's nothing left in the tank. It looks like a break, but it doesn't refuel much because your system was already depleted. Intentional rest, on the other hand, is proactive. It's the 20-minute nap scheduled before your energy plunges, the 10-minute walk that recharges you mid-afternoon, or the clear boundary of downtime in your evening that you've chosen in advance. Each is small, chosen, and effective. If you haven't tested this yet, try a simple habit. Schedule one intentional 20-minute pause tomorrow. Rest your eyes, stretch, or walk, and then notice how the following hour feels. The paradox is that unplanned distractions already consume far more of our time than deliberate rest ever would. Endless scrolling between tasks or checking your inbox 20 times in an afternoon is culturally accepted, even if it wastes hours. But sitting quietly for 10 minutes, doing nothing on purpose, still gets framed as a poor use of time. Both involve stepping away from work, yet only the latter recharges you. It's like confusing constant snacking with actual meals. Lots of consumption, very little nourishment. The humor is that work culture glorifies activity while ignoring that most of our activity is accidental leakage. Building intentional rest into a system changes everything. Instead of breaks happening by accident, you structure them the same way you schedule meetings or deadlines. They become important inputs, not gaps. When handled like this, rest no longer feels guilty or suspicious. It feels like part of the plan. Your day then stretches further, with focus peaks repeating because recovery keeps happening in between. This avoids the brittle sprint and collapse rhythm so many fall into and replaces it with something steadier. Less exhaustion means greater longevity, and that's what meaningful productivity really requires. The payoff is obvious over the long term. A person who burns relentlessly runs fast and then burns out. A person who treats rest as renewable fuel maintains consistent output for months or years. History shows that sustainable creators, researchers, athletes, and performers all build systems of renewal around their effort. Their success doesn't come from dodging rest. It comes from mastering it. Brute force can carry you through a day. Only recovery carries you through a career. If you've ever felt both busy and unproductive at the same time, tired at the end of the week but with little to show for it, you've lived the effects of undervaluing recovery. Hours poured in, results dragged out, and by the weekend you were drained. That isn't laziness on your part. That's the outcome of fueling work on empty. Rest shifts this cycle before it spirals. 10 minutes now preserves hours later. Small investments prevent full-scale crashes. Imagine redefining rest socially the same way. Colleagues wouldn't see breaks as dipping out, but as part of the work process. A 15-minute pause would be treated as valid as a scheduled call because its role is just as crucial, keeping the brain sharp enough to handle everything else. This change starts individually. You schedule rest the same way you schedule effort, you defend it in your days, and you view it not as indulgence but infrastructure. Nobody questions charging their laptop. The real question is why anyone hesitates to charge themselves. To make this practical, you can start with a challenge. Schedule one intentional 15-minute rest block tomorrow and pay close attention to how the next hour feels. That experiment is simple, but the effect is immediate. Many discover that their focus, patience, and output improve so clearly that the habit almost locks itself in after a few trials. Once proven personally, it becomes difficult to return to nonstop grind. Of course, the real obstacle to intentional rest isn't disbelief, it's interference. Our environment constantly interrupts the space we set aside to recharge. Notifications ping, screens glow, and distractions disguise themselves as urgent, stealing away what was meant to restore us. Even after recognizing rest as a productivity tool, it takes extra care to defend it. And that tension leads straight into the next major hurdle for anyone hoping to work with clarity: the trap of constant distraction. Defeating the distraction web. You know that moment when you glance at a notification, just for a second, and then realize 45 minutes have vanished? One quick check turns into 3 social feeds, a handful of random videos, and an email you didn't even mean to open. The pull feels minor in the moment. The cost adds up fast. In 2025, researchers estimate that digital distractions now consume several hours of the average worker's day. That's not a small side effect. It's often the main reason progress feels like it evaporates hour by hour. Plans, carefully built schedules, and even well-managed energy cycles can't survive if every buzz forces a restart. The real issue isn't multitasking, it's context switching. Each interruption slices through whatever concentration you had built. Neuroscience research shows it can take over 20 minutes to fully re-enter deep focus after even a single disruption. That means the 1-second glance exacts a hidden penalty of half an hour where your brain drifts back toward traction. Stack those across a normal day, and you understand why evenings often feel like wasted effort despite constant busyness. Most advice boils down to just be more disciplined. Lock the phone away, fight the urge, summon willpower. That framing makes things worse because it implies failure is personal weakness. But the truth is simpler. You're not up against chance, you're up against design. Every alert sound, red badge, and infinite scroll loop is engineered with one purpose: hold your attention. That architecture isn't neutral, it's predatory, which is why self-control feels like a losing battle. The smarter approach isn't to bet on constant resistance, it's to change the architecture itself so you don't need as much resistance in the first place. Use tech to change the architecture. Not only will self-control be easier, you'll actually get more done. One way to do that is with distraction windows. Instead of saying no more scrolling ever, you negotiate with your brain by making breaks official. The method is clear. Work 90 minutes, then allow yourself 10-15 minutes of guilt-free distraction time, then repeat. That one-line template turns vague restraint into a routine you can rely on. By scheduling the release, you stop the constant, just a second leaks. Your brain relaxes because it knows another break is already coming. And paradoxically, you end up distracted less because you stop dipping in every 5 minutes. Take this story. A colleague used to spend entire workdays in a state of miniature half-focus, always slipping back to her phone for a quick check. By evening, she was exhausted, though she could barely point to what got done. She tried an experiment: 2 official distraction breaks each day, mid-morning and late afternoon, 15 minutes each. Same apps, same content, but contained. What shocked her wasn't just the extra hours reclaimed. It was the calm. The itch to check constantly disappeared once it had a designated time slot. She started producing more, but she also stopped feeling guilty. The apps were still part of her day, just no longer her whole day. Tools can help structure those boundaries even more clearly. Most phones and laptops now have do not disturb modes that silence everything except essentials you choose. Apps exist to go further. Freedom lets you block entire websites for preset intervals. Cold Turkey does the same, but with stricter locks that you can't bypass mid-urge. Self-control, popular among students, blocks chosen sites on a timer whether you restart your device or not. And LeechBlock offers detailed options where you can allow 10 minutes of access per hour to specific platforms. Perfect if you need news headlines, but not rabbit holes. Each one reshapes the playing field, so it's not all on you. A bit of setup replaces endless rounds of guilt. Another layer is batching. Instead of being pinged in real time by every incoming message, some tools hold notifications and release them on a schedule you set, say once an hour or just twice per day. The result is fewer interruptions and longer uninterrupted work streaks. Pair that with scheduled distraction windows in the calendar itself, and the temptation weakens even more. When your devices only let you check apps at deliberate intervals, it becomes much easier to train the brain to focus in the meantime. Think of this like drawing play zones for a toddler. You don't try to suppress their energy entirely, you give them boundaries so chaos doesn't spill into every room of the house. In the same way, apps don't ruin your life if you give them their own corner. They actually cause less disruption because they're contained. You stop fighting the fantasy of complete abstinence and instead create a predictable rhythm of focused work now, distraction later. The balance stabilizes, and your day feels lighter as a result. There's also an honesty check here. Absolute bans almost always fail. Life isn't made for monk-like control, and pretending otherwise just breeds frustration. What works is treating distraction like snack food. A measured portion keeps the craving satisfied and harms nothing. Random grazing all day ruins the diet. Once you see notifications and feeds as snacks, it makes immediate sense to plan them into meal-sized windows rather than nibble constantly. But even with the best setup, temptation doesn't vanish. A nudge helps. Technology can give that too. Some apps watch for scrolling patterns and send you a gentle alert when you've drifted deeper than you intended. Others compile weekly reports showing exactly where your time bled away and when. This isn't surveillance, it's reflection. By surfacing the blind spots, the tool gives you a mirror. You don't have to guess how much distraction costs, you can see it. And once that data is visible, small tweaks feel obvious. You might move your scroll break to earlier in the day or tighten one app's allowance, because the evidence showed that's where you slip. The important shift is recognizing this as a partnership. You don't have to carry all distraction management on your own back. When you line up simple structures, supportive tools, and scheduled relief windows, what looked like willpower suddenly feels manageable. You don't eradicate distraction, you tame it into a rhythm. That rhythm makes room for both: hours where focus actually flows, and leisure moments where you don't feel guilty about enjoying entertainment fully. And this idea carries forward into a bigger question many people are asking right now. What happens when tools don't just block distraction, but actively work alongside you to improve productivity? The boundary between personal effort and external support is changing quickly. New systems promise not only to guard your attention, but to save you time in ways that would have been impossible to imagine a few years ago. The question is no longer whether tools can help. It's whether the way we use them can genuinely change how much progress we make. AI as your productivity co-pilot. AI has quietly moved from being a novelty to becoming a daily co-pilot in how we work. What once felt like an experiment or a party trick, asking an app to spit out a silly poem, now feels more like a practical assistant woven into routines. In 2025, tools are already smoothing out the rough edges of everything from inbox overload to meeting chaos. Platforms like Zapier and Talkwalker integrate meeting assistants that auto-summarize discussions and extract action items so you don't spend an extra hour rewriting notes. Email drafting and task triage that once drained energy now happen in seconds. The choice is less about whether AI works and more about whether you're willing to treat it as more than entertainment. Many hesitate, though, because AI still carries tension. On one hand, it's quick and convenient. On the other, results often need editing. People frame that gap as proof it isn't worth the effort. Why bother if you have to check its work? But this misses the point. If you were going to spend an hour writing from scratch, getting a first draft in seconds, and then spending 10-20 minutes refining it still leaves you far ahead. AI doesn't erase the role of judgment. It accelerates the parts where friction normally stalls you. Thinking of it as a co-pilot is the key. It lays the groundwork so you can spend more brainpower steering toward the outcome. Of course, not all studies show smooth gains. A randomized controlled trial, Meta, early 2025, found that for experienced developers, AI suggestions sometimes slowed progress, with tasks taking about 19% longer to complete. That doesn't mean AI is useless. It means human oversight and usage patterns matter more than hype admits. Treating AI as an infallible autopilot risks disappointment. Treating it as a co-pilot, with you still making key calls, is where the value shows up consistently. The meeting example is an easy one to picture. For years, calls ended with scattered notes and unclear responsibilities. Now, AI recorders transcribe in real time, flag action items, and note who owns which task. Zapier's meeting assistants or Talkwalker's AI summaries save hours by turning memory into a clear plan. The time saved isn't just about typing fewer notes, it's about walking out of meetings with direction instead of ambiguity. That clarity compounds into faster follow-through and fewer missed details. The inbox is another clear use case. Waking up to 300 unread emails can paralyze you before the day begins. Filtering them manually drains the sharpest part of your morning energy. AI now scans, sorts, and ranks by urgency. It places the 5 most critical emails at the top and sets aside promotional clutter. Suddenly, 10 minutes of focused replies accomplishes more than hours spent half reading messages that never mattered. That reprioritization is where the real payoff lies. Not more keystrokes per hour, but fewer hours sacrificed altogether. Drafting is where the blank page loses power. Proposals, reports, blog outlines, all can arrive in skeletal form in seconds. Is the draft perfect? No, but it kills the worst barrier, starting cold. First drafts are where many creative projects stall. If an AI hands you a rough shape, your job shifts from creating under pressure to sculpting into clarity. That alteration might sound small, but it removes one of the most intimidating walls in daily work. Yet judgment matters. AI still misses tone, nuance, and politics. Your coworker's one-line message may look unimportant in a summary, but carries weight you understand because you know their role. Machines don't sense that context yet. That's why tools like auto summaries or prioritizers work best as frameworks, not verdicts. Let the AI filter the noise, then apply your awareness where nuance could shift outcomes. This is where human experience combines with machine efficiency, producing more than either could manage alone. A simple rule of thumb makes this balance easier. Use AI for first drafts and summaries, but always spend a focused 5 to 10 minutes reviewing. Your review isn't wasted effort, it's the multiplier. That brief layer of critical judgment turns a mechanical pass into something ready for real use. When people skip this step, errors and mismatches slip through. When they include it, productivity jumps while quality remains intact. It's the co-pilot model in practice. You fly the plane, the system lightens the load. Humor helps to ground expectations. AI won't sweep your floors or fold laundry, no matter how hyped the demos get. But it might remind you, through a cleverly phrased nudge, that you've ignored the same undone task for days. That's the line. It helps, but it doesn't live for you. Expect it to erase responsibility and you'll be frustrated. Use it to reduce frictions no one misses, rewriting notes, triaging clutter, filling out tired templates, and you reclaim what matters. This distinction between autopilot and co-pilot is the real hinge. Autopilot thinking turns people passive, outsourcing decisions they can't afford to lose. Co-pilot thinking keeps direction in your hands while the system trims the drudgery. Every summarized meeting, sorted inbox, or drafted outline doesn't just save minutes, it reserves energy for deep work that defines your day. That shift adds up to more than convenience. It rebalances where your best mental fuel goes. AI changes the margin between distraction and focus. Before, routine admin quietly siphoned hours expected for your best projects. Now those drains shrink. The reclaimed attention isn't just free time, it's clarity redirected toward work only you can do. Clearing an inbox is never the main goal. It's just the gatekeeping task. With tools reshaping gates, you finally step into the space you actually wanted to occupy. That's what makes the co-pilot useful. Not the tasks it does, but the doors it opens. Still, values set direction. AI smooths the road but doesn't choose the destination. A generated email still represents work. You decide if that work matters. A meeting summary is helpful only if the meeting itself led somewhere worth recording. Increasing efficiency without a sense of purpose just accelerates busy work. That's where productivity hacks often falter. They chase faster without asking, faster toward what? Tools magnify clarity if you already have it. If you don't, they magnify noise. So a practical challenge? Try one AI micro task this week. Use an app to auto-summarize a single meeting or draft a rough version of an email and then actively edit it. Time how long it takes compared to doing it from scratch. Share the difference in the comments. It turns the experiment into reflection, and you might discover entire pockets of time to reclaim. Seeing your own numbers is far more convincing than hearing someone else's estimates. And this opens up a deeper question. Once the admin clutter reduces, once emails shrink and meetings close with clarity, what do you really do with the time you recover? That's the turning point. Productivity tools can strip away friction, but the real challenge is deciding what habits, routines, and systems make that reclaimed time durable instead of just another scroll. The next step is less about shortcuts and more about foundations. Beyond quick fixes, building habits that stick. Why do so many productivity tricks fade out after a week or two? At first, they look promising. People post about their shiny new planner, share their complicated calendar system, or commit publicly to a 30-day challenge. For the first few days, everything seems to click. But give it a month and the binder is unused, the app is abandoned, and the routine that once felt energizing is half forgot. What happens? Most assume the problem is personal discipline. In reality, the issue isn't them. It's that these quick fixes never had the roots to survive everyday life. The attraction of surface-level hacks is easy to understand. They feel fresh, dramatic, and motivating. That initial rush convinces you that real change is underway. But when fatigue hits, plans shift, or a bad night's sleep wrecks your morning, the hack has nothing to hold on to. It collapses because its strength was built on excitement, not construction. Motivation doesn't last. Life disruptions always come. And if your whole system rests on intensity, the first storm knocks it over. The better path is habits that can carry themselves through the messy days. Lasting productivity grows from actions so small, so grounded, that interruptions don't destroy them. A giant 90-minute morning routine looks good in theory, but oversleep once and the whole structure breaks. By contrast, writing 3 sentences right after brushing your teeth might seem unimpressive, but the simplicity makes it durable. Days add up. Those sentences become pages. Habits that last aren't about size, they're about resilience. Behavioral research backs this up. Studies on habit formation note that small, repeatable behaviors compound better than dramatic bursts. Systems like tiny habits work by attaching modest actions to cues you already follow automatically. Think of brushing your teeth or making coffee, rituals already locked into your day. Add something small right alongside. As habit expert BJ Fogg suggests, stacking new habits onto existing ones is the most reliable way to guard against abandonment. Consistency, not intensity, is what allows progress to survive real life. Even productivity writers like Cal Newport recommend coupling time blocking with anchored rituals to make sessions stick. So how do you make this practical? One method is habit stacking. Take an action you already do each day and attach a tiny step to it. For example, after you pour your morning coffee, jot 3 bullet points for the day in a notebook. The anchor eliminates the question, when will I do this? Because the timing is already attached to something automatic. The system isn't fragile because it doesn't rely on extra planning, it piggybacks on what you do naturally. A second technique is accountability microchecks. Big accountability groups can be intimidating and lose steam. Instead, try a lighter version. Ask a friend to agree to a simple 48-hour check-in by text or DM. Every other day you just share one sentence, what you actually worked on, no matter how small. The frequency prevents drift and the pressure is gentle. You're not proving your whole system works, you're reporting a step, which builds momentum without becoming performative. Another common trap is assuming that once you start a routine, you should never miss a day. That mindset guarantees disappointment. Life isn't smooth. Everyone skips. The error is treating a skip as collapse. That's why sustainable systems add reset rituals, formal ways to restart without guilt. Here S1, the moment you notice you've dropped a habit, declare the very next morning a clean start. Do the absolute smallest version of the habit, 2 minutes, 1 note, a single line written. The reset proves you can begin again quickly, which makes disruption temporary instead of fatal. This way of thinking reframes productivity as survival, not spectacle. For example, you don't need a huge streak of unbroken journaling to benefit. What matters more is keeping the habit alive enough to carry it into the next week or month. That requires lightness. A habit that's easy to reset is one you keep. A habit that punishes you when you slip is one you abandon. Consistency isn't about never breaking, it's about how fast you re-enter once you have. Tomorrow morning, as a reset becomes a simple, built-in safety net. Humans naturally lean toward dramatic gestures. It feels bold to start an elaborate journal system or train for a 5 a.m. miracle routine. Small habits, 5 minutes of review, 2 lines of notes, can look trivial, which is why so many people skip over them in search of big transformations. Yet the imbalance is clear. Big systems attract attention but fall apart quickly. Modest practices often look invisible to others but quietly last. Instead of trying to impress, the goal is building structures that endure. One trimmed example is enough. You don't need to spend hours designing a 14-color planner spread. A single sticky note at your desk with your 3 anchor tasks works better because you'll use it even on your worst day. The difference is scale versus reliability. Reliability looks less dramatic in public, but wins over time. If you look at who continues to produce essays, music, or consistent study sessions, they're not the ones locking themselves into rigid, cinematic routines. They're the ones doing the lighter steps that carry through moods, travel, or hectic weeks. Reliability creates an archive of progress that accumulates quietly while others keep restarting bold new systems. It helps to think of this as layering habits around your life like scaffolding. They don't need to look presentable, they only need to hold you steady enough to climb. Each small habit is another support beam, brief, ordinary actions that accumulate into durable structures. Once the habit roots itself, it requires very little mental load to maintain. Just like you don't negotiate with yourself daily about brushing your teeth, you stop negotiating about your cornerstone practices, they just happen. The shift becomes visible in how productivity feels. Instead of waking up asking, "Do I have the willpower to push today?" you simply roll into the pattern. Instead of ongoing guilt about breaking your elaborate routine, you reset easily with a light touch. Instead of treating productivity as another performance, you view it as an autopilot background system. That calm is the real gain. You gain focus without draining willpower. Success then looks less like weeks of intense drive and more like years of steady rhythm. High effort always looks impressive in the short term, but it's fragile. Small, renewable behaviors always win across seasons. That's why the often quoted idea that systems beat goals holds weight. The system is what survives when the schedule shifts or your energy dips. Build one that's small enough to last, and let the survival itself be the measure of progress. The real takeaway is that sustainable habits make productivity feel lighter, not heavier. They stop being about tools or apps. They stop being about discipline as performance. They become background behaviors that give you steady returns. A single page read each night, a 3-minute reflection before bed, a quick log of actions after lunch, all unimpressive alone, but over years, they outlast every dramatic routine. The next challenge is not how to keep habits alive, but what to use them for. Once the hacks and resets stabilize your days, you face the bigger decision. Why build these systems at all? Without a clear reason behind them, even the best routines risk becoming empty. And that larger question shapes the direction of everything that follows. Productivity with purpose. What's the use of crossing off more boxes if the things you're finishing don't actually matter to you? That's the starting point for thinking about productivity with purpose. You can build a flawless calendar, tick through an endless string of tasks, and still close the week with a dull sense of emptiness. Efficiency alone doesn't create meaning. Without a clear direction, every hack and system just helps you get better at moving in circles. The surface looks impressive, but the roots feel hollow. This quiet conflict is more common than people admit. Most of us have moments when we wonder why we're driving ourselves to exhaustion. On the page, our lives look efficient. Digital planners filled, task lists organized, inboxes sorted with the help of every tool available. But ask a deeper question: what's the point of all this movement? If the outcomes don't connect to what you value, then all the effort is just a treadmill. You sweat, you strain, you burn energy, but you don't move anywhere real. That's how highly productive people can still end up unfulfilled. The mechanics work exactly as designed, but the purpose behind them never got defined. This is where the idea of soft goals matters. These goals don't usually appear in company reports or planner apps, but they add something that measurable achievements rarely give: personal meaning. Think about wanting to watch 50 films this year, or blocking one evening a week just for family meals, or deciding to spend more time outside with no headphones, nothing to check, just walking. Author and teacher Matthew Dix often emphasizes this point. Choosing specific non-work goals adds richness to your everyday life, even if they'd never be labeled productive on a spreadsheet. These goals remind you that progress is about living intentionally, not just performing output. Take learning an instrument as a clearer picture. At first, the progress seems almost invisible. One chord here, a single melody there. No one celebrates your practice sessions. There's no dashboard that reflects improvement. Yet the growth matters. Every small victory creates a sense of joy that your work tasks rarely replicate. Or think about committing to family film nights. It may look like downtime to others, but for you it becomes shared laughter, inside jokes, and lasting memories. Long walks function the same way, almost impossible to justify on a productivity chart, yet they often create the mental clarity that later fuels your best work. Each example looks small on paper, but in practice carries much deeper value. When viewed this way, productivity itself takes on a new definition. Instead of asking, "How much can I squeeze into the day?" you start asking, "What do I want this day to actually contain?" The best productivity system isn't the one crammed tightest with obligations, it's the one that leaves enough space for what keeps life meaningful. For some, that's creative output. For others, it's closer family connection. For others, it's maintaining health or contributing to community. Productivity should serve those deeper goals, not erase them. If your systems consistently push joy into the leftover margins, then you're efficient but unfulfilled. The difficulty is that culture trains us to ignore this shift. We grow up measuring nearly everything in terms of visible output: numbers achieved, units completed, content published. A day without hard results feels like failure, even if it contained memory-making moments. That's why people can feel guilt over choices that genuinely enrich them. Watching a film with a child or taking an unrushed walk may feel indulgent, because society doesn't assign those activities the status of productive use of time. Slowly, we learn to optimize for metrics instead of meaning. Yet the tools we've built for efficiency can be reframed. The purpose of saving time doesn't have to be feeding another assignment back into the system. The purpose can be carving out hours for what matters. If AI sorts your inbox, don't fill the gap with more email. Protect an afternoon to rest or create. If automation saves you an hour, consider using it to pursue a soft goal. The system still functions, but now it serves you instead of the other way around. Efficiency becomes less about speed and more about shaping time. It can help to laugh at how often we aim productivity in the wrong direction. If the only definition of success is finishing the list, collapsing on the couch, and calling it a day, then all we've won is exhaustion. Contrast that with a person who may finish fewer tasks but actively reserve time to read, to talk with family, or to touch their creative project. Both were productive, but one built a week worth remembering while the other built a blur. Productivity should enable living, not become the excuse for ignoring it. This reframe is what ties every hack and every habit back to something larger. All the reclaimed hours from distraction control, all the energy protected by mapping your rhythms, all the habits strong enough to survive tough days, none of it matters if the time just gets repacked with empty effort. Efficiency alone can't answer the question of meaning. What you choose to do next is the filter that defines whether your productivity actually improved your life. Try applying this immediately. Grab a piece of paper or the Notes app on your phone and write down 3 non-work things you'd want to do this year. Maybe you want to take 10 hikes, finish a book you've kept on the shelf, or cook more meals with family. Once you've listed them, pick one and actually schedule a 30-minute block this week for it. That small move transforms abstract purpose into action. The tasks you cut or streamline now have somewhere worthwhile to go. Consider the emotional version of this too. If you could buy just 1 hour a week back, what would you do with it? That single question brings clarity fast. For some, the answer is exercise. For others, it's learning, playing, resting, or connecting. The details don't matter as much as the honesty. Whatever comes to mind in that instant is the clue to what productivity should be protecting for you. And so the challenge isn't simply to keep refining hacks, it's to connect them with something beyond efficiency. Systems and routines prove valuable only when they serve a deeper purpose. Without that connection, you risk becoming excellent at achieving tasks that don't really matter. With it, the same systems suddenly feel lighter, because each completed action frees you toward something meaningful to you. The best measure of productivity with purpose is not how much you've finished, but how often you've shaped your days around things you genuinely value. Small as they seem, those choices accumulate into the life you're living, one week after another. Which means each new system, each reclaimed pocket of time, carries a decision alongside it. Will this fuel more tasks, or will it create more life? And that decision is where everything points next, because at its core, productivity is not about filling space. It's about creating space so the right things can exist inside it. Productivity works best when it serves what matters most. All the hacks we've covered only matter if they open time and energy for the life you want to live. So here's the final challenge. Pick one idea from this video and test it this week. Remember, small, messy experiments compound more than perfect plans left untried. Start with something easy. Try one 10-minute window hack, then drop a sentence in the comments about what you managed to accomplish. I'd love to hear what you choose. And if you want more videos that combine practical hacks with a focus on well-being, consider subscribing.